we're going to begin with our prayer book here, and I'm going to give a little bit of explanation for the benefit of those who may not have seen these prayers before, recited these prayers before. So it's an important part of what we do. So I've said many times, maybe you've heard, that, there's three parts to every teaching, three parts to every practice, to any study that we do. The first part is to set our intention, our motivation for why it is that we are doing these practices and these teachings and these studies. And it's for the benefit of the enlightenment of other beings. We're not doing this for our own selfishness. We are doing this so that we can purify ourselves, that we can then pass on the wisdom and the skillful means that we develop for the benefit of the enlightenment of all other beings. So this is the first part. This is our motivation. So the opening prayers are reminders, are remembrances of that motivation. And the second part is the big part, which is whatever the study is, whatever the teaching is, whatever the practice is that we're doing, that's the main part of the session. And then the third part comes at the conclusion is the dedication. Whatever merit we have gained, whatever wisdom we have gained, whatever skillful means that we have gained, we are dedicating all that to the enlightenment of other beings. We're not holding on to it for ourselves, we're giving it to all other beings. So these are the three parts of every practice and study and teaching that we do. So we go to the opening prayers, page 1 in our book. And this first one is called the altruistic motivation. And so we will recite these where it's indicated, it says 3 times. We'll do it 3 times in English. And later on, as we progress, we'll start introducing the Tibetan part of it. But for right now, we'll do it in English. So this prayer is an altruistic motivation that we're doing this for the benefit of others, and not just our family, not just our friends, not just the people that we like, but we're doing it mostly for those who are difficult, those who have harmful intentions for us, those who might deem us to be enemies, or maybe we might deem them to be unfriendly or enemies ourselves. So it's very important to be able to do this for the benefit of all beings. So this is primary number 1 reminder to be able to do that. So we recite this together in English. All mother sentient beings, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation and omniscience, may they experience happiness, be separated from suffering, and swiftly I will establish them in the state of unsurpassed, perfect, complete, and precious Buddhahood. All mother sentient beings, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation and omniscience, may they experience happiness, be separated from suffering, and swiftly I will establish them in the state of unsurpassed, perfect, complete, and precious Buddhahood. All mother sentient beings, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation and omniscience, may they experience happiness, be separated from suffering, and swiftly I will establish them in the state of unsurpassed, perfect, complete, and precious Buddhahood. Okay, the next prayer is the action bodhicitta prayer. So bodhicitta is a Sanskrit, it's 2 words. Bodhi means enlightenment, and citta means the heart or the mind. The heart mind is the holy enlightened mind. Bodhicitta is the holy enlightened mind of all the Buddhas, of all the Bodhisattvas, all the enlightened beings. So for us to be able to put that into action, This is the reminder prayer for us to do that. So we'll recite this one time in English. Thus, until I achieve enlightenment, I perform virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. Until death, I perform virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. From now until this time tomorrow, I perform virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. So I think that's pretty self-evident, self-clear. If anybody has any questions, please don't hesitate to turn on your microphones and speak right up as we're doing these. That's what this is for, is to be able to get familiar with these prayers.
I'd like to ask two questions.
Sure.
It says, from now until this time tomorrow, I perform virtuous deeds. Well, the line before that, it says until death. Why is it that you say this until tomorrow? And the other question is, this is the first prayer book that I've seen where it says all mother sentient beings. Could you explain that, please?
Okay. Well, the first question is, why do we say from now until this time tomorrow? The thing about tomorrow is it never comes. It's always there in the future. It's a way of expressing the future. So for as long as we are living until death and until tomorrow comes, which never comes because there's always another tomorrow, I will continue to perform virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. So it's kind of a flowery way, poetic way of saying that I will always do these practices. I will always have the benefit of other beings in my mind and my heart through my body, speech, and mind. So that's the answer for from now until this time tomorrow. The answer for mother sentient beings. For us to say that we will do things for the benefit of others may be very difficult. And there's strangers, there's people that we don't like, there's all kinds of reasons that we could think of why we wouldn't want to do things for just other beings. But we recognize that we've had many, many, many lives before. And these lives are kind of the transpersonal. They may not have been Lance, or they may not have been Tom, or they may not have been William per se, but we collectively have had all these many lives. And to have these many lives, we've had to have many mothers. And so with our mother in mind, thinking that we would not want to do anything to harm our mother, that we then take that to the next step and say, all beings have been our mothers before, and all beings will be our mother now, and all beings will be our mother in the future. So by looking at all beings as the mother, then we have a motivation to go beyond any selfishness that we might cling to and reticence that we might have by not wanting to do something for other beings. But if we can look at them as our mother, now we let that reticence go. Now we look at that reluctance go. And now we're most willing to do everything we can for mother sentient beings. So whether they've been human beings, whether they've been animals, whether they've been insects, all sentient beings that have some level of a consciousness, that have some level of birth, that have some level of a life, that respond to stimuli during their life, that procreate, that continue their species, and that ultimately die. This is sentient beings. These are sentient beings. So we see that we are all part of that continuum of all sentient beings as our mother. So it's an important thing that we do. I'm not that familiar with all the other traditions, but in the Drikung Kagyu, this is something that in almost all the prayers that I have seen is referred to as mother sentient beings. So I hope that answers the question. Okay. So the next prayer is called the Long Refuge Prayer. So this prayer here, we are taking refuge, and refuge means to go to a home base, to go to a safe place that we can go to kind of either recharge our batteries when things start getting low, or a place that we can go to find comfort, and a place where we can find solitude is our refuge. So for us, refuge is the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. We say the body, the speech, and the mind of the Buddha. This is the refuge that we take. So the long refuge expands that a little bit, and it says that we take refuge in the kind root and lineage lamas. So the lamas are our teachers. So the root lama is the teacher who really resonates with you and introduces you to the nature of your true mind. So we'll talk more about that as weeks come by. But the root lama is the one that you really, really connect with. And then the lineage lamas are all the other lamas that are within the lineage. And they may be past lamas who have passed away many, many years ago. And they may be lamas that are living right today, and the lamas that are to come in the future. That we take refuge in that there are teachers in all different ways and so on in the lineage that help us to understand our true nature. We take refuge in the deities of the mandalas of the yidams. So the deities are these enlightened ones that are all within ourselves. Everything is within ourselves. It's not out there. Everything is internal. Everything is within ourselves. And we come to recognize all these complexities that we have that all have the same quality of the Buddha. And that's what we're trying to discover, what that is. So these deities are all the activities of that Buddha nature that we have within ourselves. So we identify them as these deities. And the mandalas are like their palaces, are like their lineages, their retinues, their followers, their entourage. So again, we'll learn more about that as we go on. So we take refuge in the deities of the mandalas of the yidams. The yidams are our teachers, the tutelary deities. So we'll learn more about that as we go on. And then we take refuge in all the exalted Buddhas. We take refuge in the perfect Dharma. We take refuge in the excellent order of the Sanghas. And we take refuge in all the noble Dakas, Dakinis, and Dharma guardians, possessors of the eye of wisdom. So the Buddhas, we're talking about the mind of the Buddha. The Dharma is the speech of the Buddha. This is the speech of the Buddha, the intellectualization of the system of the Buddha. And then the excellent order of the Sanghas is the community of those beings who are on a path to become Buddha. So the Sangha. So we are a community, we are the ordinary Sangha to become bodhisattvas, holy enlightened beings, and then become Buddhas. And then there is the great bodhisattvas, the eight great bodhisattvas. And they are very, very close to being Buddhas. And they're like perfect human beings. And we learn who they are. And this is the community that we are recognizing within ourselves, because all this is within ourselves. So we take refuge in the noble Dakas, Dakinis, and Dharma guardians. So the Dakas and Dakinis, the Dakas are male, the Dakinis are female, and these are enlightened beings who come to our rescue, who come to help us, who come to lead us through ourselves. We recognize them. They may come something that we hear, something that we see, something that we recognize as being a holy path, as being the essence of bodhicitta, the essence of the holy enlightened mind. So these are beings that are carrying this within ourselves again. All this is within ourselves. And the Dharma guardians are those who build the temples, who print the books, who write the books, the Dharma books and so on, who teach the Dharma. These are Dharma guardians who are there to continue the pathway of the teachings and so on. So these are all possessors of the eye of wisdom. So we talk about the eye of wisdom, we talk about the third eye. So whether it's clearly apparent in the drawing, we see the third eye, or it's implied, there's this third eye, this wisdom eye, in which we begin to recognize this holy nature of these beings. So this is the long refuge prayer. So we recite this 3 times together, please. And when we say this, we are holding the 3 jewels in our hand, like this, our 2 hands together, and our thumbs are in the palms of our hands to remind us that we're holding the jewel of enlightenment, like this. And we recite this together. We say, we take refuge in the kind root and lineage lamas. We take refuge in the deities of the mandalas of the yidams. We take refuge in all the exalted Buddhas. We take refuge in the perfect Dharma. We take refuge in the excellent order of the Sanghas. We take refuge in all the noble Dakas, Dakinis, and Dharma guardians, possessors of the eye of wisdom. We take refuge in the kind root Lama and lineage Lamas. We take refuge in the deities of the mandalas of the yidams. We take refuge in all the exalted Buddhas. We take refuge in the perfect Dharma. We take refuge in the excellent order of the Sanghas. We take refuge in all the noble Dakas, Dakinis, and Dharma guardians, possessors of the eye of wisdom. We take refuge in the kind root Lama and lineage Lamas. We take refuge in the deities of the mandalas of the yidams. We take refuge in all the exalted Buddhas. We take refuge in the perfect Dharma. We take refuge in the excellent order of the Sanghas. We take refuge in all the noble Dakas, Dakinis, and Dharma guardians, possessors of the eye of wisdom. So now we go to page 5. We're going to skip page 4 for tonight. We'll explain that another time. So now we're going to go to the short refuge prayer. So the short refuge prayer is the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, the 3 jewels. So the Buddha is represented as the mind of the Buddha, the heart mind of the Buddha. And then the speech of the Buddha is at the throat. This is the intellectualization of the Buddha. This is the action of the Buddha. That which comes from the intellect, that which comes from the brain, is coming by way of the throat, represents action. And this is the Dharma teachings of the Buddha. And then the body is represented at the forehead, or the crown of the head. This is the body of the Buddha. So the physical body, the appearance of the Buddha, and so on. So we say in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. So the Sangha is the body of the Buddha, is the community of the Buddha, the community of beings like us, the ordinary beings and the extraordinary great bodhisattvas that we'll talk more about. So it says, I take refuge until enlightenment is reached. And by the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. So through the virtues that is typified by generosity, and that I am doing for the benefit of others, may they all attain enlightenment. So this is the short refuge prayer. So this is the first prayer that most all of us memorize, and it's very, very something that we recite over and over and over again every day, and reminds us of our connection to the Buddhas and that which is within ourselves, our true nature. So this Buddha is not an exclusive Buddha in terms of this essence of loving kindness and compassion, that, you know, we can talk about this as being like the Christ. We can talk about this like being God. We can talk about this like being Muhammad. All the different traditions of human beings that have brought these things together, all of them in their purest essence talks about this true nature. What happens after that, it begins to get skewed, it begins to get slanted. People begin to take advantage of that and begin to manipulate other beings. But what we're trying to do here is to keep it in its purest form as Buddha nature. That's how we call it Buddha nature. But we could also call it as the God, and we could call it as Christ, and so on, if we follow in those pathways. So we say, so here we're holding those three jewels in our heart: the jewel of the Buddha mind, the jewel of the Buddha's speech, and the jewel of the Buddha's body. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha most excellent, I take refuge until enlightenment is reached. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha most excellent, I take refuge until enlightenment is reached. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha most excellent, I take refuge until enlightenment is reached. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. Okay, and now page 6. This is the last of the opening prayers that we'll recite for tonight. And this is very, very important. This is called the 4 immeasurables. This is the 4 immeasurables of the holy enlightened mind, or bodhicitta. You remember when we talked about action bodhicitta? So bodhicitta has 4 immeasurable qualities. And this is something that you will get to know like the back of your hand. It will become second nature to you. That we have loving kindness. This loving kindness for all beings, this wisdom that we have, this grace that we have, this forgiveness that we have for all beings. For we know that there is a true nature. We know that there is this love, and that this love is a guidance for us all. And we have grace for those who may not recognize that, who may not see that. For those who are doing negative things, non-virtuous things, we have grace for them and say, well, these beings don't understand, they don't recognize, they haven't seen that yet, but yet I still have this loving kindness for them. I may not like them, I may not like what they're doing, but I still have loving kindness for them. So this is very important. This loving kindness never, never goes away. It is a vital part of the enlightened being, this holy enlightened mind. So the second vast of immeasurable of the vast qualities is compassion. Because when these beings, other beings or ourselves, are not using that loving kindness, are not living that loving kindness, are not exercising that loving kindness, that there is suffering. There is suffering within myself. There is suffering in other beings. There is suffering that I may have caused in other beings. There is suffering that I cause with myself. There is suffering that other beings cause other beings, and so on. And recognizing all this suffering that we all have is to have compassion. We have compassion for these beings. There's a reason that they are suffering. And the wisdom is understanding that reason. But the compassion is not being judgmental and just saying, oh, these suffering beings, if there's something I can do to help these suffering beings, I want to do that. And if it's just that I can take my love and take my compassion and give that to them, that's what I will do. So to have compassion for suffering sentient beings, to have suffering for ourselves, compassion for ourselves as we suffer, to have suffering for our lives, to have compassion for our suffering lives, excuse me. And that's not to say that all life is suffering. There are many beautiful things in this life. But what we recognize is that things turn. And what may be happiness today turns into suffering tomorrow. Nothing stays the same forever. Everything changes. So that is one of the sufferings that we have, is that things don't stay the same. So we have compassion as number 2. Number 3 of the 4 immeasurable qualities is joy. That we have this joy within ourselves, that we have realized this loving kindness, that we have realized this compassion within ourselves, for other beings. And we have this joy in recognizing that other beings have this also. And we may have absolutely nothing to do with their happiness. But when we see another human being that is doing something kind for another human being, it brings a joy to us. If we happen to be watching some animals and we see the birds, or we see the squirrels, or we see dogs and cats and all the different animals that we have in our yards around us in nature and so on, and we see when they are taking care of each other, and we can recognize that, and it brings a joy to us. It brings a smile to our face. And we want to do something to help them. We want to feed them. We want to take care of them. We want to be able to show our love and our compassion towards those beings. But they have this joy themselves, and we celebrate that joy along with them. We call this empathetic joy. It's an empathy, that we have empathy, that we share that same joy with them. So that's the 3rd of the 4 immeasurable qualities. And the 4th one is called equanimity. And equanimity, the root word is equality, is equal, that all things are the same. Sometimes the equanimity may be 50-50. Sometimes it may be 30-70. Sometimes it might be 40-60. There's all different kinds of levels of sameness. But we recognize that there is this sameness between all human beings, that we're all the same. We all have the same emotions. We all have the same loves. We all have the same confusions and so on. We are all going through the same type of conditions and so on. And animals as well, and insects as well. We all have this sentient life, that we look at each other as these mother sentient beings. So there's this sense of equanimity, this sense of balance, this sense of sameness that we recognize all nature in. So these are the 4 immeasurable qualities. And we talk about this a lot, and we meditate on this a lot. And it will mean more and more to us as we go on and we begin to meditate, we begin to practice, we begin to see these 4 immeasurable qualities. We've always had these 4 immeasurable qualities. They are part of our nature. And we've acted on these 4 immeasurable qualities, but we didn't identify them as this. Now we're bringing our attention to that. And now we will begin to recognize and realize these and be able to exalt these qualities more and more and more, so that these qualities are our true nature. This is the mind of the Buddha. This is what all the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas, all the enlightened ones, are made of, is the wholly enlightened mind, is the 4 immeasurable qualities. So we say this prayer to help us to remember this. We recite this every day. So the first line is, may all mother sentient beings, boundless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. So that is loving kindness, to have happiness and the causes of happiness. That's loving kindness, wisdom. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. So if we recognize suffering, we have compassion. We have compassion for that suffering. And the compassion is the actualization of that loving kindness, of that wisdom. That's the compassion. So those who are suffering, we have compassion. We have an actualization. We try and do something for them to help them. Maybe it's just sending something from our heart to their heart, but we try and help all beings. Then the next line is, may they never be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. So we recognize that there is a happiness, and that this happiness is so pure that it's completely free from sorrow. So this is pure joy. This is that joy of happiness. No sorrow at all, just complete joy. And maybe at one time or another, you've had that sensation, you've had that awareness of complete joy, that blissful feeling, that loving feeling of all beings, of all things. Everything is in balance. Everything is together, that pure joy. And then the fourth line is, may they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. So this equanimity, this balance. So what this implies is that we have a dualistic nature. We are always grasping at things. We are always attaching to things. We're always trying to find identity with these things. But sometimes we try and find identity, and sometimes we are trying through our aversions to things, and we're pushing things away. We're saying, I don't like those things. I hate those things. And we identify with that. So our identity, our ego, which we think is so vital to us, is the cause of our dualistic nature, where we attach to things and we have aversions to things. But if we can rest in equanimity and balance, then the ego just kind of goes away. The ego is not as important. We give the ego a job. So we'll talk about that as we go on, because that's a very important facet of what we do in the Dharma teachings, is understanding the ego and not letting the ego control us. We control the ego. So these are the four immeasurable prayers, four immeasurables during this prayer. So we recite this together now 3 times. May all mothers, sentient beings, boundless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. May all mothers, sentient beings, boundless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. May all mothers, sentient beings, boundless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. So those are the opening prayers to help us to remember our motivation for receiving these teachings, studying, doing the practices, and developing our meditation. Anybody have any questions or comments about that? Don't hesitate to speak up, please. Okay then. All right, so now we go to this outline that is in the chat. If you have the ability to pull that up and you can see that on your screen, or if you have the ability to print it, is fine. If you want to take some notes, I suggest that. So what we need to be able to understand is, what is our primary cause for living? A simple question. One that maybe we've asked ourselves over and over again, at a time of crisis or at a time of sweetness in our lives. Why am I here? What is the meaning of my life? So we come to say that our primary cause is to recognize our true nature. Our true nature, the essence of this bodhicitta, of this holy enlightened mind, what we call our Buddha nature. We have human nature, our human nature. And our human nature is full of all these confusions, full of all these emotions, full of all these sorrows, full of all this stuff that we create for ourselves that keep us focused on being a human being, but don't liberate us from being a human being until we are realizing, until we're shown that we have this true nature within ourselves that is this Buddha nature. Now, again, we might call it the God, we might call it Jehovah, we might call it Muhammad, we might call it Krishna, we might call it Jesus. There's many different names for this nature. Different traditions, different civilizations have different names for it. And in its purest essence, it's all the same. But as I said before, many civilizations, many cultures, they begin to manipulate people with understanding what this is and using this as a power to be able to control beings and to have them do things and so on that are not speaking of that true nature. What we're trying to do as best as we possibly can is to preserve that essence. The teachings that we have here are ancient teachings that go back 2,600 years. These teachings have been recorded and have been memorized and have been recited over and over again because of their purity. And they've been tested over and over and over again. And if you compare these teachings and so on to the other traditions, you'll find that they ring true in those teachings too. That there are many, many, many similarities to these. But it's only in the way that the way these are approached and the way these are applied that begin to differentiate these different traditions and so on. But it's the essence that is the same. So if you've studied spirituality in its many different forms, you will see that that might be true. So it's there for us all to investigate. Don't take my word for it. Don't take anybody's word for it. Investigate it yourself. That's the invitation to do that, to be able to test these ideas and so on, to be able to recognize these things and see this true nature within yourself and see your human nature of what it is that blocks up this true nature and how that all works. So this primary cause for us to have this life is our Buddha nature, to be able to recognize this Buddha nature, to release ourselves, to liberate ourselves from our human nature, from the confusion, from the pain, from the suffering, from all the vicissitudes that happen in our lifetime and so on, all this stuff that we create for ourselves. So we explain many things in our traditions, our Buddhist tradition in particular, through the uses of metaphors and similes and analogies. Everything is, something is like this, it's like that, it's something like that, something like this. So we can begin to be able to comprehend, what this might be, because some of these things might be very abstract in their utter simplicity. The essence of all this is very, very, very simple. We already have this within our midst. We already have enlightenment within ourselves. The problem is we don't recognize it. And then once we have a glimpse of it, once we do have recognitions of it, we don't live it. We suppress it. We say, oh, that's too bad, I can't do that. Or this is more fun, I'd rather do this over here. And we start to do other things. But the point is, we all have this enlightenment within ourselves. It's always there, it's always been there, it'll always be there. That's our spirituality, our spiritual nature. And it's a matter of being able to recognize that and be able to become the embodiment of that. So these similes help us to do that. The metaphors help us to do that. The analogies help us to do that. So here, this primary cause, this Buddha nature, one simile is to say it's like silver abiding in ore. If we go out into the countryside somewhere and we start digging a hole in the ground, and we might come up with this rock, and we may see this rock and say, oh, it's just a rock, I'm going to throw this rock away, I don't need this rock. But then somebody else sees that rock and says, you know, that rock is silver ore, that there is silver in there. And what you have to do, you have to wash that rock, you have to clean it, then you have to smelt it down, you have to get rid of all the impurities, and what's left is this pure silver that is in there. You didn't recognize that, but somebody else did. And that silver is there. So our Buddha nature is like that. You may not recognize that pure nature that you have within yourself, but somebody else might recognize that. Or you may recognize it within yourself, and you help somebody else recognize their pure nature. But it's in there. So this true nature may not be shining for us to say, here I am, here's the silver, here's the Buddha nature. You have to kind of be aware of how to discover this, of how to recognize this in its defiled form, in its muddied form, in its confused form. And then what you do to purify it. Another simile is like oil abiding in a mustard seed. If you take a tiny little mustard seed and you say, oh, well, that's nice, you know, I can use it for my flavorings as a condiment in my sandwich or something like that to give some flavor to things and so on. But it's not recognized that if you squeeze that mustard seed, a little drop of oil comes out. And that little drop of oil then gives even more flavor and gives more color and more texture to the things that you do. You may be able to use that for food. You may take a bunch of mustard seed together and squash it together, and now you have a whole bunch of mustard seed oil that now you can use for cooking, you can use for flavoring, but you can also use for painting. You can use for a number of different things. But it's not obvious that that oil is in the seed until you squeeze it, then that drop comes out. And then the ideas begin to come of what I can do with that drop of oil. So that's another simile for our Buddha nature being like that oil in the mustard seed. Then the third simile is like butter abiding in milk. When you get milk, whether you milk it from the cow yourself or you get it from the grocery store, and in the old days, you know, before everything was homogenized, you would buy milk and the cream would kind of rise to the top and so on. And it was all whole milk. There was none of this, you know, 2% milk or 1% milk or no fat milk and everything. So there was all this butter fat that was in this milk. And you don't know that it's there because it's like hidden. It's locked in the molecules of the liquid that is the milk. But if you take that milk and you put it in a device where you are churning that milk, where you're compressing it, releasing it, and compressing it, and releasing it, those butter solids begin to come together, and you find that you have butter in the milk. And now you can use it to cook with, you can use it to put on your skin if you wanted to do that. It has flavoring. It has many qualities that are very, very useful. But to the uninitiated, just looking at milk, you don't recognize the potential for the butter in there. So sometimes we might be able to discover these things on our own. And it may take a few lifetimes for us to discover these things. But if a teacher comes to you and says, oh, you know, if you take this milk and you put it in this device here and you start churning it, you're going to get butter. Now, all of a sudden, you just bypass lifetimes of waiting to discover that butter in the milk. So this is a lesson of recognizing that there are hidden things that we don't see, and there are teachers to help us to recognize those things. If we rely on ourselves to do everything, we may find that we can do these things, but it may take years and years and years and lifetimes and lifetimes and lifetimes to do that. So we need to be able to embrace teachers and so on like that. So the Buddha, one of the names of the Buddha is as a teacher. Buddha literally means in Sanskrit, means the awakened one. So being awakened to all these possibilities, to having the wisdom of knowing all these things, of knowing the silver in the ore, of knowing the oil in the mustard seed, of knowing the butter in the milk, and knowing. So in this way, the Buddha becomes a teacher to be able to explain this to those who are his followers, and so on. So ultimately, we become the Buddha. We become the teacher. We become the awakened one. This was one of the primary teachings of the Buddha. He says, I'm not special. I've realized this. And now it's my job to teach you how I recognize this, for you to be able to enjoy this yourselves. He says, but everybody has this Buddha nature. Everybody has this awakened quality within them, but they need to awaken it. They need to remove the blockages. They need to remove the obscurations, the muddiness that is around the ore, to squeeze the seed to be able to get the oil out, and to churn the milk to be able to get the butter. We need to do the work to be able to recognize these things. So it says that likewise, sentient beings, all conscious creatures who are reborn within the 6 realms can become Buddhas. So this was a primary teaching of the Buddha. So what we find, that there are 5 families of this Buddha awareness, this Buddha awakening, this Buddha consciousness, if you want to call it that. If you want to substitute the name Buddha with another name, if you want to call it Jehovah, if you want to call it Muhammad, if you want to call it God, you want to call it Krishna, whatever you want to call it is fine with me. You know, you can say the 5 families of the God, of God. You could, you know, what are the 5 families of God? What are the 5 families of spirituality? You want to look at it as just pure spirit. Just call it pure spirit, whatever tradition you want to be part of. We find that there are these 5 families. There's the disconnected family. There's the indefinite family. There's the hearer family, the solitary realizer family, the Mahayana family. So we're going to now go through and look at these a little bit deeper. So this disconnected family has basically 6 traits. So it says, even if they see the suffering and faults of samsara, they are not moved. Samsara is the name that we give to this nature, that we all look out, and we look out the window, and right here in our midst, we say, this is our nature. This is the nature into which we are born. And it has all these things. I'm looking at all these manufactured things that come from natural things that grow outside. There's wood here, there's cotton here, there's wool here, there's paints here, there's metal here, there's all kinds of things that have been manufactured. But if I go outside, I see the trees, I can dig in the ground, I can find the ore, I can see all these things that are all the composite elements of what make up all this stuff inside here. But we refer to it all as nature. But this nature, all this nature, is the ocean of suffering. Human beings are in the midst of all this confusion, are in the midst of all this stuff that we think we know what it is, but we're really not sure. We really don't know. And so we're in this midst of this all-pervasive suffering. And this all-pervasive suffering is called samsara. In Sanskrit, it's called samsara. In ancient Christianity, they called it the Sophia. And other traditions have other names for this nature, this phenomenal, temporary nature that we are trying to get a handle on, that we're trying to identify. And still today, here we are in 21st century, and they're still trying to find out things. Every time they find out an answer, they find that there's another 20 questions that have to be answered. So it's this unfolding that keeps on going on and on and on. And we keep trying to find it out. But it's this ocean of suffering, this samsara. So even if they see the suffering and faults of samsara, they're not moved. So what that means is, though people recognize that they are suffering and other people are suffering, they're not moved to try and understand something that may be invisible to them. You know we've got our physical body. We've got our intellectual body. And most people, there's 7.5 billion people in the world right now, and most every one of those beings, that's all they know, is their physical body and their intellectual body. But we also have a spiritual body that is invisible, that you have to be able to go inside, that you have to be able to quiet the physical body. You have to quiet the intellectual body to allow the spiritual body to become apparent to you, to be able to recognize it. So these beings have suppressed that spirituality. They're just involved with their physicality and with their intellectualism. They don't look for, they don't care about, they suppress their spirituality. So even if they hear of the great qualities of the Buddha, they have no faith. So even if they hear about a great teacher, whether it's the Buddha or it's the Christ or it's Jehovah or whatever great teacher you might think of, even though they hear those teachings, they still are very, very skeptical and they don't believe it because they can't feel it, they can't see it, they can't weigh it, they can't measure it, they can't predict it. So they say it doesn't exist. They have no faith that maybe there's something there that I don't know. These beings have no modesty. They will do things that are very, very hurtful to other beings. They will offend other beings in many different ways. They will say things to beings. They will hurt them in many different ways, cause suffering just with what they say, and not be ashamed of it. They have no modesty for themselves. They will continue to do it over and over and over again because they have this individualism quality about themselves that says, I'm the only one that matters. Nobody else matters. I can do whatever I want. I can denigrate anybody else. I can put them down in any way, and it doesn't matter as long as it makes me feel good, makes me feel better. So they have no modesty, these beings. They have no thought for what others think. They may be in a position to say, you know what? I know best. I may be the firstborn. I may be the lastborn in my family. I know best. They can rationalize anything. They may be rich, they may be poor. Oh, I'm a poor man, and I know more than the rich guy over there because I'm not confused like he is because he has so much money. He's always thinking about the money. I don't have that problem. You know, I'm poor. I don't have that problem. I can think clearly. So we don't appreciate what others think. We don't let that in. We're self-arrogant. We have no compassion for others. If I have the comforts of my home, the comforts of my work, the comforts of my family, and then I see someone over here who is suffering, who doesn't have food, who doesn't have proper clothes, who doesn't have shelter, I'm not moved to do anything to try and help that person in any way, shape, or form. Or maybe I'm working at the office and there's a whole bunch of people there and there's this new guy who just comes in who just was given a job and so on. And I'm not going to do anything to help that guy. He may get my job one day. I'm not going to help that guy. I have no compassion for that guy at all. To try and help them to grow in the company. So whether they're sick or they need a job or all these different things, we're only thinking about, again, our own self. And number 6, they do not experience a single regret when they repeatedly commit non-virtuous actions. That they have no sense of remorse for those hurtful things that they do. They act with complete impunity, that they can step on people, they can manipulate people, they can steal from people, they can abuse people in so many different ways, and people's possessions and so on. They can steal from people, so many different things, and they have no regret for it at all. So this is the disconnected family. This is the disconnected people who have no sense at all of any kind of spirituality. Spirituality means, if you look it up in the dictionary, one of the several definitions that will be in the dictionary, one will be connection. Spirituality means connection. Connection to each other, connection to our families, connection to our world, connection to nature, that we're connected, the spirituality. And the more you think about that, you might say, yeah, that's really true. You know, I've always thought of it, you may think that I've always thought of it as being religious, of being religious. You know, if you look religion up in the dictionary, religion is man's connection to a supreme being. So right away, it more than implies it is a connection. Religion is a connection to the notion of a supreme being. Spirituality does not speak of a supreme being. Spirituality is the connection between each other and between nature. That's spirituality. Whether there's a supreme being, whether we think that there's a supreme being, we know there's a supreme being, or whatever, doesn't have a direct bearing on our spirituality, how we behave with each other. So that's an important distinction to be made. One of the things about Buddhism 101 is we're going to help define the vocabulary of all these different things of understood words, things that we've been using all these years, but find out that there's some other inner meanings there that we need to be able to dig up, to uncover, and to be able to recognize and be able to become the embodiment of. So religion and spirituality are two of those words, to be able to understand what the essence meaning of those words are. So this disconnected family has these 6 traits. They have no chance to work towards enlightenment. Enlightenment being something that is transcendent, to be able to elevate them, to exalt them from their human nature into something that is beyond their human nature, into their, what we would say, their Buddha nature, or you might want to say their God nature, or their Christ God, nature, or their Krishna nature, or whatever you want to call it, their supreme nature. That there is something else there that we have within ourselves that maybe we have recognized. Maybe it's the thing that has brought you to be able to listen and to take part in these kinds of teachings. There's got to be something else. I've exhausted all these other possibilities. There's got to be something else. Maybe it's in this spirituality. Maybe it's in this Buddhism. Maybe it's in this Christianity. Maybe it's in this Judaism. Whatever you want to choose. There's something else besides just this physical body, and something else besides this intellectualism. But these people have shut that down. They won't accept that. So now we come, and if anybody has any questions or comments, turn your microphone on and speak up, because that's fine. That's what this is about. So now we talk about the indefinite family, or the dubious family. And this depends on contributory causes or conditions. So this family, these people, they have an inkling. Maybe there's something there. I'd like to find out what that is, but you know what? I'm going to hold back any kind of commitment to this until I'm really convinced. You got to convince me. I don't think that there's anything there, but maybe there is. Maybe I should try this out. I'll see. So they go and attend teachings. They associate with other friends now who seem to be of a higher level. Maybe they're more educated, or maybe they talk with a different vocabulary. Maybe they have, some different beliefs in their lifestyle and so on that are a curiosity to these dubious beings, to these indefinite beings. And then maybe they start studying texts. They start getting some books. They start going to the library, or they start, buying some books or whatever. They start attending some different talks that are on the internet or on the radio, and they start hearing these things. But, they're dubious. They're dubious. They're doubtful about all of this. But, they've got one toe in the water, so to speak. Maybe they put their whole foot in. Maybe they're standing with both feet in the water, but they haven't made a commitment to it yet. They're dubious. They're quick to say, oh, this isn't working. Oh, I'm going to give this up. Oh, maybe I'm going to try something else over here. They won't stay with one tradition. They stay with it for a month, and then they move on to another one. They don't finish the book they're reading. They close it up after 2 or 3 chapters, and they go to another book. Or maybe they don't even start in the book. They just go to the last chapter, and they start reading the last chapter and say, I don't need to read the whole book. I can just read the last chapter, or maybe the middle of the book. These are dubious people. So this is the indefinite family, and it depends on contributory conditions. So what this means is it depends on their access to teachings. To be in a neighborhood where maybe there's a church, or there's a library, or there's other people where they can share some of these ideas. There's in the workplace, maybe there's a break room, and they start talking among themselves about these things, about other things besides just work and so on. So these dubious people is the result of all these conditions. They may have not sought these things out, but these things kind of crossed their paths. And now they said, okay, maybe I'll investigate this because it crossed my path. But they weren't going out and looking for this. So then the third thing The third group is the hearer family. They're hearing, they're listening. You know, these are also called the let me before I go there. So these are beings who are listening to the teachings. Now they've gone a little further into the water. Not only do they have both feet in the water, but now they're kind of wading in the water. They're kind of floating in the water, and they're listening. They're being a little bit more involved, and they're flowing with the waves. They're flowing with the ebbs and the tides of the water and so on. And they are, and the reason why they are doing this is because they fear the unknown. They fear this notion of samsara, this suffering. And maybe these people, maybe this teaching has something there that will save me. That I don't have to be afraid anymore. Maybe this system has something, and I want to understand. So I wade into it a little bit more, and I feel the movement of that. But it's out of their fear of not knowing something that may save them is what attracts them to this. And they're yearning to achieve this liberation. They're learning to achieve this, what they think is this enlightenment, something that is now going to make them very aware, make them more aware than they were before, make them special, to bring them to what we would call nirvana. Nirvana is this liberation from this suffering. So it makes them yearn to achieve that now this suspension, this floating above, not being pulled down into this suffering, but now floating above. And those who, but these beings are doing this very selfishly for themselves. They're not doing it for the benefit of others. They're doing it for themselves. They want to save themselves from further suffering, from further pain, and so on. So these hearers, in the early tradition of Buddhism, these were called the arhats, or these were called the shravakas. And these were the early, the fundamental disciples of the teacher. So whether it's Buddha, or it's Jesus, or it's Muhammad, or it's Moses, or Krishna, or any of these beings, people come to them for different reasons. So one of these reasons is to be saved. So they may be doing this, and these people, they may have been miscreants of all different types. They were liars, they were cheaters, they were killers, they were thieves. They did all kinds of terrible things, and they're trying to redeem themselves from these things. And they think, well, maybe these leaders here are teaching these things will show us this. So they're the fundamental disciples who are wading in the water, but they haven't completely submerged themselves yet. They're testing it. They're still, trying to understand. They're a little bit more connected than the dubious family, but they're still not completely convinced. So this is a big body of beings. This is the first body of beings and so on. So these are called the hearer family. So then comes the solitary realizer family. So this solitary realizer family come out of the hearers. They're a notch above the hearers. They have all the same qualities of the hearers. They fear samsara. They yearn to achieve nirvana. They have little compassion. But these beings, they have achieved something or they think that they have achieved something that gives them an arrogance, that gives them a conceit, that gives them a sense of being better than others. I'm the Buddha. I'm the Christ. I'm the God. I am this. I am that. I am the one. God speaks to me. But the way they got there, they keep hidden. They don't share that, because they came through a process to get there. They had to get in the water, they had to be, taught certain things and so on. They had to learn certain practices, they had to learn how to swim, they had to learn how to do all these things and so on. But they said, I did this all by myself. These are the solitary realizers. And they preferred to stay in solitary places, because they know themselves that there's this falsity about them. So they prefer to remain by themselves because there they can live in their own delusion. If they go down into the village, if they go with the other people and everything, people are going to be asking them and talking to them, and they're going to be challenged. And then people are going to find out that they really aren't as good as they think they are. So their bubble, to protect their bubble, they stay by themselves, the solitary realizers. These are what are called the Pratyeka Buddhas. So in our prayers, you'll hear those names come up. Shravaka, Pratyeka Buddha. The Shravakas are the hearers. They're the elementary listeners. They're the elementary disciples of the teacher. And then the Pratyeka Buddhas who now think, oh, I'm as good as the teacher, and maybe I'm even better. So these solitary realizers are part of this family of the teacher, family of the Buddha, however you wish to talk about it. And you probably know people like this. You may be one of those people. You, at some point, were dubious. You, at some point, were completely disconnected. You, at some point, have felt like a solitary realizer. We all go through that. And if you haven't done that yourself, maybe you know people close to you who have, and you have an empathy with them. So now we come to the fifth family, which is the Mahayana family. So this is very close to the cause of enlightenment. Mahayana is a Sanskrit word, 2 words. Maha means great. Very simple. Maha means great. Yana is a vehicle. So it's a great vehicle. So in Buddhism, we talk about that there are these different, there is this one pathway that we call Buddhism, the Dharma. Now, there's a Christian pathway, there's a Jewish pathway, there's a Hindu pathway, and within them there might be other pathways too. How we traverse that pathway now depends on your conveyance. What is your mode of conveyance? What is your vehicle? What is the car that you are getting into to get to where your destination is? So in Buddhism, there's 3 vehicles. There's the Hinayana, which is the fundamental teachings. Then there's the Mahayana, which is the great vehicle or the middle way. And then there's the Vajrayana, which is the wisdom vehicle, the wisdom tradition vehicle. So the Mahayana family is now those that are close to enlightenment. The Hinayana, the fundamental, the basic thing that they are learning is discipline. Remember, they're coming from all these defilements in their lives, being thieves, being robbers, being killers, being sexual deviants, doing all these non-virtues and so on. That's who these people are. And the first thing that the teacher says to them is, you got to stop doing that stuff. You got to get a hold on your life. You got to discipline yourself. So let me help you do that. Let me shave your head, because so much of our identity, so much of our ego is wrapped up in our appearance. And so much of that, believe it or not, is with our hair. And when you shave your hair bald, your head bald, all of a sudden you look like everybody else. And it's harder to have an identity when everybody else looks like you, when you're bald like that. And not only that, give me your clothes, and I'm going to give you these clothes, and everybody's going to wear the same kind of clothes. And they're very, very, very simple clothes. Everybody's going to look the same. So now we've taken away these two very important modes of your identity, your hair and your clothing. So now what's left now is, now we have something to work with, to teach you some discipline. So this is the first part. So the Arhat and the hearers and the dubious family and the solitary realizers have gone through that and have surrendered into this sense of non-identity. To be able to wade into this, to be able to get something on the other side, to get their enlightenment. So in the Mahayana family now, this is the great vehicle. This is the middle way, where we say, okay, now we can recognize that we've got the discipline. We've developed the discipline. And now we recognize that we have this dualistic nature all the time. We always see these things, I want to go this way, but that has some issues with it. Maybe if I go this way, that'll have, some counter issues to it and so on. But maybe if I stay somewhere in the middle here, I don't have to commit to one or the other, but I'm committed to the middle and so on. And you can do that, but you got to have a discipline to be able to do that. So we do that. This is the middle way of the holy enlightened being. That we're not completely nihilistic, nor are we completely eternalistic. That we're between these two extremes of these two ideas that nothing matters, nothing counts. I can do whatever I want, and there's no retribution for whatever I want. Or on the other side, that everything's eternal, and I will have to, I will receive the benefits, the rewards for all the good things I do, and I'll be forgiven for all the bad things that I do. It's eternalistic. Or that I do things that are so bad, I will be punished forever in this eternalistic retribution, that there is this eternalism. So in the Mahayana, this middle way vehicle, it's this ground that we can move in between these two systems like that. So it takes a little bit more, it takes a lot more concentration, it takes a lot more discipline, it takes a lot more knowledge to be able to navigate through that. It's much easier to just be like, well, if I do this, living as a monastic, here's what time I get up, here's what time I go to bed, here's what time I eat, here's what time I study. Or over here, if I don't do these things, I'm going to wind up in heaven or I'm going to wind up in hell, So this Mahayana family is very close to enlightenment. So this is the naturally abiding family, aware of the potential to develop all the Buddha's qualities through the mind of the Buddha. So what this means is we're awakening ourselves. We're coming to realize this mind of the Buddha. So we talked about the body of the Buddha. We talked about the speech of the Buddha. the body of the Buddha, the physicality. The speech of the Buddha is the intellectualization. But now we're talking about the mind of the Buddha, to be able to understand what is the process of developing the heart. And this is dependent upon doing for others and not selfishly doing for yourself. So by recognizing the bodhicitta, which we've been talking about, this mind of the Buddha, this and the notion of the bodhisattva, the holy enlightened being. Bodhi means enlightenment, sat means a being, sattva is a holy being. Bodhisattva, the holy enlightened being, that this is the hero now of the Mahayana, is the holy enlightened being. A human being who is on the path to become a Buddha must go through the stages of being a holy enlightened human being, being a holy enlightened being to be able to reach that. So the Mahayana is this pathway of being able to travel this vehicle that we get on the road to enlightenment, to be able to attain that liberation, that Buddha nature, or that God nature, or that supreme nature, whatever you want to call it. So this naturally abiding family, this naturally abiding means that you get to this point where you realize that this is part of being a human being. This true nature that we have is as natural as our human nature is. But the human nature has been suppressing it through the ego and so on. Now we realize we've had some glimpses of this true nature and say, you know what? This is as natural to me as my human nature is. And maybe it's even more natural. This is the way I should be. This is the true nature, because the human nature is all this fabricated stuff, all this contrived stuff, all this stuff that I made up to make my ego feel better. But when I take away the ego, all I'm left with is my true nature. And you know what? This feels really good. This is the way I really want to feel. This is beautiful. I love everybody, and everybody loves me. So that's why we say this is the naturally abiding family. We're abiding in nature. And that this is the perfectly workable family. The potential to achieve all the Buddha's qualities through the power of habituating themselves in root virtue. I'll say it again. The perfectly workable family, potential to achieve all the Buddha's qualities through the power of habituating themselves in root virtue. So we find that we have our human nature, and in our human nature is all this emotional stuff, all this confusion, all this dualistic nature of virtue and non-virtue. And we have to navigate our way through all of this. What does all this mean? You know, when does virtue become non-virtue? When does virtue become virtue? All this stuff. Is this virtue? Is that non-virtue? You have to figure all this stuff out. So we say that this is our workable nature. You know, as human beings, this is part of our gift that we've given ourselves, to be able to give ourselves this life, to be able to do that. This is what is special about being a human being. An animal doesn't have this ability. It may be a natural sentient being, but it can't do that. An insect can't do that. It's a sentient being, but it can't do those things either. The trees and the grass and all the vegetables and all the things, they may not be sentient in the way that we think of sentient, but they can't do these things either. They have no consciousness. So it's only human beings that can do that. So this is the workable family now that has elevated itself through its application of focus and attention and discipline into a system that is able to guide it along this path of virtuosity, of being a virtue, to become a holy person, to become an enlightened person. So there's potential to achieve all the Buddha's qualities, and the Buddha's qualities are bodhicitta, loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity. Everything that the Buddha does, everything that all enlightened beings do, whether it's Christ, whether it's Krishna, whether it's Mohammed or what have you, all these different traditions have these heroes that have these qualities, and these qualities are within ourselves. To achieve these qualities, to achieve the recognition of these qualities and the exaltation of them, to bring them up, to allow them to remove the blockages that are causing us to hold them back. Through the power of habituating ourselves in root virtue, to making ourselves virtuous beings, wholesome beings, not unwholesome beings. And this sometimes is the rub. This sometimes is the difficult thing, especially for guys like me who grew up, in America, during the 1950s, and, the 1960s and so on. My goodness, the world was our oyster. We could do anything. We could have everything that we could do and everything. And, just like these dubious characters and the disconnected characters, I know what it is to get away with stuff. We were testing everything. We were trying, when you're a young kid, it's part of what you do, I think. It's what I did. Fortunately, I never really hurt anybody more than I hurt myself, which is good. And so my point here in saying this is that we be able to recognize that all these things that we thought we were having fun with were all unwholesome things. We were getting over on other people. We could laugh about it. We could joke about somebody, not dressing properly, or somebody, the way we thought they should dress, or the way they speak, or the color of their skin, or all these things that we use to separate ourselves from other people and other things, is all this non-virtue. And we revel in that. And we form these groups, we form cliques, we form families, we form nations that hate other people, that hate other nations, and so on like that. Until we finally realize that that's not virtue. That's not loving kindness. That's not compassion. That's not joy. That's not equanimity. Virtue is being truthful. Truthful is being natural. Virtue is being natural. So when we recognize that, then we want to habituate ourselves in that virtue, being a good person. As we get older, we find that easier to do. We will have exhausted all the other possibilities. By the time we reach 50, 60 years old, we say, I've done all those things. I got to pay my taxes. I got to pay my bills. I got to be a nice guy to get along in life. I got to do all these things. Because I know when I was young, I didn't do any of these things. And my goodness, I had all these problems. I had to, I had to go and talk to the tax collector. I had to go to the divorce court. I had to do all these things that were the result of my non-virtuous activities, my unwholesomeness. And I'd rather drive 30 miles an hour in a 30 miles an hour zone than go 60 miles an hour and keep getting speeding tickets. So we want to habituate our virtue. And the sooner that we can recognize that, the happier we become naturally. So this is the Mahayana family that realizes this, that really now is swimming in this ocean, you know, and we're not sinking in this, we're buoyant in this. And there are times when we can rise above it. And there's many stories that we can tell, that we will tell about that, what that means. But now we're not being pulled down. We're in control. We know the difference of virtue and non-virtue, and we're in the middle way. We find that it's a little bit of this, a little bit of that I can do things, and I do it for the enlightenment of other beings. I do it for the benefit of other beings, not for myself. Any benefit that I derive comes from doing things for other beings. If I do things selfishly first for myself, it's very thin. It's easily broken. But if I do things for other beings, they become my support. That becomes my support. That work becomes my support. That becomes my merit. That's like money in the bank. The good deeds that we do, the generosity that we have, the loving kindness that we have, the meditation that we do, the investigations that we do, all these things we'll see as we continue on through our exploration of what the Dharma is. In the Buddhism 101, we'll begin to identify all these things. So we can enter this as disconnected family. We can enter this as dubious, indefinite family. We can enter this as the hearer family, or as the Pratyeka Buddha solitary realizer family. That's all fine. And you can stay that way in the end if that's what you choose to do. But what we are describing here is what it is to be a spiritual being, a connected being with each other, with all humanity, with all of nature. This is what it is. What the Buddha taught was a method to be able to do this. It's not the only method. There are many other great teachers. And we can follow those teachers, and that's fine. And we can follow many teachers. That's fine too. You know, one does not have to be exclusive of another. But we do say it's really wise to make a commitment and to see that commitment through and to allow yourself to really assimilate into that system. And for me, that's what Buddhism is all about. You know, I was fortunate. I've had many experiences over my life. I've studied many different traditions. And the Buddhism speaks to me because it has such a body of work in which to be able to analyze, to be able to bring into my life, and to be able to make relationship with, to be able to say, yes, 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 yes. I can see how all this all fits together. There's no mysteries. The mysteries are revealed. The mysteries from the other traditions are unveiled, are be able to be articulated, where they are there for us to be able to not just discover, but to be able to understand the causes and the results and so on like that. So it doesn't hide anything from us. So the genius of Siddhartha Gautama, who became the Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, was that he was able to create this system that we can follow, a repeatable system that we can follow to be able to understand all this stuff in our life, all this nature, all the good stuff and all the bad stuff, and how to differentiate between it. And what comes out is wisdom. And we can look at these different wisdoms and so on. So that's the invitation. That's what we're working on. This is the primary cause, our Buddha nature. This is what we are trying to investigate.